Okay, this is a map of the Germanic people, countries with a Germanic-speaking majority. And this is from the NordicPerspective.com website. If you want to learn more about it, you can go to their website. All right, so you've got different colors. Here it says Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Iceland. Oh my goodness, I need glasses. Is that Forsay Islands or Forge Islands? Germany, Netherlands, Belgium, Switzerland, Austria, Great Britain, and Ireland. Oh, Faroe Islands. Faroe. Wow. Cool. Magnifying glasses do a great job. So, all right, let's see. AI summary. To understand Southern Germanic Europe, consider these key points. Geographical scope includes regions of Germany, Austria, Switzerland, and parts of Italy and France. Cultural diversity. Home to various dialects, traditions, and cuisines, influenced by historical migrations. Economic significance. Features strong economies, particularly in manufacturing, technology, and tourism. Historical context. Rich history shaped by the Holy Roman Empire, the Reformation, and World Wars. Natural landscapes. Characterized by the Alps, Black Forest, and numerous rivers like the Danube and the Rhine. Political structure. Comprises federal states and distinct governance, particularly in Germany and Austria. From the Encyclopedia Britannica, the Germanic people, also known as Teutonic peoples. Please, if someone knows how to pronounce that, tell me that. All right. The origins of the Germanic peoples are obscure. During the late Bronze Age, they are believed to have inhabited southern Sweden, the Danish peninsula, and northern Germany, between the Ems River on the west, the Oder River on the east, and the Harz Mountains on the south. The Vandals, Gepidai, and Goths migrated from southern Sweden in the closing centuries BC and occupied the area of the southern Baltic coast, roughly between the Oder in the west and the Vistula River on the east. At an early date, there was also migration toward the south and west at the expense of the Celtic peoples, who then inhabited much of western Germany. The Celtic Helvetii, for example, who were confined by the Germanic people to the area that is now Switzerland in the 1st century BC, had once extended as far east as the Main River. By the time Julius Caesar, Germans were established west of the Rhine River and toward the south had reached the Danube River. Their first great clash with Romans came at the end of the 2nd century BC when the Cimbri and Teutoni invaded southern Gaul and northern Italy and were annihilated by Gaius Marius in 102 and 101. Although individual travelers from the time of Pythias onward had visited Teutonic countries in the north, it was not until the 1st century BC was well advanced that the Romans learned to distinguish precisely between the Germans and the Celts, a distinction that is made with great clarity by Julius Caesar. I guess I'll have to read more about Julius Caesar. It was Caesar who incorporated within the frontiers of the Roman Empire those Germans who had penetrated west of the Rhine, and it is who gave the earliest extant description of Germanic culture. I have to laugh at myself. Sorry, I just laugh at myself for sometimes the way I read different word meanings. In 9 BC, the Romans pushed their frontier eastward from the Rhine to the Elbe. But in AD 9, a revolt of their subject Germans headed by Arminius ended in the withdrawal of the Roman frontier to the Rhine. In this period of occupation and during the numerous wars fought between Rome and the Germans in the 1st century AD, enormous quantities of information about the Germans reached Rome, and when Tacitus published in AD 98 the book now known as the Germania, he had reliable sources of information on which to draw. The book is one of the most valuable ethnographic works in existence. Archaeology has in many ways supplemented the information Tacitus gives, but in general it has tended only to confirm his accuracy and to illustrate his insight into his subject. I'll have to look the book up. Maybe I can find a link on Amazon and put it on the bottom for you all. Be interesting, right? Tacitus relates that according to their ancient songs, the Germans were descended from the 3 sons of Manus, the son of the god Tusto, the son of earth. Hence, they were divided into 3 groups. The Ingavones, the Hermanones, and the Eastavones, but the basis for this grouping is unknown. Tacitus records a variant form of the genealogy according to which Manus had a large number of sons who were regarded as the ancestors of the Suebi, the Vandals, and others. At any rate, the currency of these songs suggested that Tacitus' time, the various Germanic peoples were conscious of their relationship with one another. While individual Germans in Roman service would sometimes refer to themselves as Germani, the Free Germans beyond the Rhine had no collective name for themselves until the 11th century AD, when the adjective Deutist, modern German Deutsch, of the people, came into fashion. The meaning of the word Germani and the language to which it belongs are unknown. Interesting. I'm interested in this right now. The principal Germanic peoples were distributed as follows in the times of Tacitus. The Chatti lived in what is now Hesse. The Frisi inhabited the coastlands between Rhine and Ems. The Chachi, or Chorchi, were at the mouth of the Weser, and south of them lived the Cherusci, the people of Arminius. The Suebi, who have given their name to the Schwaben, were a group of peoples inhabiting Mecklenburg, Brandenburg, Saxony, and Thuringia. The Seminones living around the Havel and the Spree rivers were a Suebic people, as were the Lombards, who lived northwest of the Seminones. Among the 7 peoples who worshipped the goddess Nerthus were the Angli, or Angles, centered on the peninsula of Anglan in eastern Schleswig. As for the Danubian frontier of the Roman Empire, the Hermunduri extended from the neighborhood of Regensburg northward through Franconia to Thuringia. The Marcomanni, who had previously lived in the main valley, migrated during the last decade BC to Bohemia, which had heretofore been occupied by a Celtic people called the Boii. where their eastern neighbors were the Quadi in Moravia. On the lower Danube were people called the Bastarnae, who are usually thought to have been Germans. The Goths, Gepidae, and Vandals were on the southern Baltic coast. Tacitus mentions the Suans and the Citones as living in Sweden. He also speaks of several people of less historical importance, but he knows nothing of the Saxons, the Burgundians, and others who became prominent after his time. That was a tough one. By the end of the 3rd century AD, important changes had taken place. East of the Rhine, there were 3 great confederacies of peoples unknown to Tacitus. The Roman frontier on the lower Rhine faced the Franks. The main valley was occupied from 260 by the Burgundians, while the Agri ducamates of the Black Forest region were held by the Alemanni, or Alemanni. The Burgundians appear to have been immigrants from eastern Germany. The Franks and the Alemanni may have been confederacies of people who had lived in these respective areas in Tacitus's day, though perhaps with an admixture of immigrants from the east. The peoples whom Tacitus mentions as living in the Baltic coast had moved southeastward in the second half of the 2nd century. Thus, the Goths now controlled the Ukraine and much of what is now Romania. The Gepidae were in the mountains north of Transylvania, with the Vandals as their western neighbors. By the year 500, the Angles and the Saxons were in England, and the Franks controlled northeastern Gaul. The Burgundians were in the Rhone Valley, with the Visigoths as their western neighbors. The Ostrogoths were established in Italy, and the Vandals in Africa. In 507, the Franks expelled the Visigoths from most of the Gaelic possessions, which had stretched from Pyrenees to the Loire River. And the Visigoths thereafter lived in Spain until their extinction by the Muslims in 711. In 568, the Lombards entered Italy and lived there in an independent kingdom until they were overthrown by Charlemagne, 774. The areas of eastern Germany vacated by the Goths, and others were filled up by the Slavs, who extended westward as far as Bohemia and the basin of the Elbe. After the 8th century, the Germans recovered eastern Germany, Lower Austria, and much of Styria and Carinthia from the Slavs. A lot of history here. I know. Cheryl, slow down. According to Julius Caesar, the Germans were pastoralists, and the bulk of their foodstuffs, milk, cheese, and meat, came from their flocks and herds. Some farming was also carried out, the main crops being grain, root crops, and vegetables. Both the cattle and the horses of the Germans were of poor quality by Roman standards. The Iron Age had begun in Germany about 4 centuries before the days of Caesar, but even in his time, metal appears to have been a luxury metal for domestic utensils, most of which were made of wood, leather, or clay. Of the larger metal objects used by them, most still made of bronze, though this was not the case with weapons. Pottery was for the most part still made by hand, and pots turned on the wheel were relatively rare. The degree to which trade was developed in early Germany is obscure. There was certainly a slave trade, and many slaves were sold to the Romans. Such potters as used the wheel and these were very few, and smiths and miners no doubt sold their products. But in general, the average Germanic village is unlikely to have used many objects that had not been made at home. Foreign merchants dealing in Italian as well as Celtic wares were active in Germany in Caesar's time and applied prosperous warriors with such goods as wine and bronze vessels. But from the reign of Augustus onward, there was a huge increase in German imports from the Roman Empire. The German leaders were now able to buy whole categories of goods: glass vessels, red tableware, Roman weapons, brooches, statues, ornaments of various kinds, and other objects that had not reached them before. These Roman products brought their owners much prestige, but how the Germans paid for them is not fully known.